I'll do my lawyerly thing. If you do not want to be recorded, now's the time to exit. That's about as much lawyering as I want to do. Meg, I'll actually record this and then we can talk about it later. All right. So I just want to spend a couple minutes and tell you what an exciting time we have. Not only we have this meeting where we had probably close to 100 people sign up for this, and I'm not sure how many will show up, but they're all still coming in and I'll let them in. But next week, or I should say next month in April, we've got the amazing Ann Gore that's going to talk to us about blending empathy, and emotional intelligence into their IG career trajectory. So really excited about that. In May, we have a workshop with Louis Eisen, effective information management policies, which we all need. So that's certainly something that's going to be exciting. June is a work in progress. We are working on all kinds of different options for a year-end kickoff. And quite frankly, I think it's going to be great no matter which avenue we go. So stay tuned for that. Follow our website, follow our Twitter page, follow our all our social campaigns to find out about some of the things we're doing. Again, I've muted everyone. I'll follow chat. Meg, if you could follow chat as well. If questions are answered, are needed from Jesse afterwards, we'll get those answered. The couple last things I want to talk about in terms of this schedule, stay tuned for some exciting things that are going to kick off next year. We are planning a golf networking event down in Mohegan Sun in September. Jesse, we would love to have you fly out for that because that would be fun. But we are planning that. We are putting the final touches on some of the things, but watch the waiver wire, watch our news, because that is going to be an exciting thing. Speaking of exciting things, we are absolutely also doing some transitioning of board. Donda, top left-hand side for me, as she always is, as our past president, and I will take that chair next year. So we're going to need to elect a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. We already have a bunch of nominations, but if you want to actually step into those roles, please let us know. We will have an election process before we end our calendar year, which is in June. Not only are those elected positions, but they're appointed positions. The VP of Professional Development that Colin does right now, the VP of Information Technology that Meg does right now, VP of Membership that the incredible John Curran does, as well as our VP of Marketing, Tim Fullen, who actually is walking the Appalachian Trail, so he's taking a little hiatus from us, and he is absolutely not on this webinar, I don't think, unless he's got good Wi-Fi in the middle of the woods. And another committee member we had added last year, Stephanie McKinney. So hang on and wait a little bit to the end of this presentation. So this is the new rule, VP of Community Outreach, and Stephanie's done an amazing job in developing this as a role we've never had. Exciting things happening. She is just a ball of energy, Stephanie, and I love what you're doing, and really, really looking forward to some of the things she's going to say at the tail end of Jesse's speech. So everyone that's on this call, we want your involvement, no matter how much you can give us. I think the real benefit of Armor International, and including your local chapters, are when you get involved and you're more involved in what's going on. So whatever involvement you want to give us, we're willing to get you involved and get you integrated to this great community we have. So with that, Colin, I'm going to kick it over to you. Unmute yourself, and then we'll get going with Jesse. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. So I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Jesse Wilkins, the ineffable, highly and widely respected Jesse Wilkins. So as I was going back and looking at Jesse's career, and bio for this introduction, one of the things I noticed, I think, that is Jesse has every certification known to man, including one that I was unaware of, a certified beer judge. So I think I'm going to look into that myself going forward. But 25 plus years experience in the industry. Jesse is the founder of Athro Consulting. Prior to that, he led the CIP training and other training for AIM. Was also a principal consultant at iMerge and is a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. Jesse was served for over 7 years, I believe, as a sergeant. So with that, please welcome Jesse Wilkins.
All right, let me get this thing shared so I actually know what I'm doing here. I do want to thank Mark and Meg and Donda and of course Colin, John and Tim and Stephanie and the rest of the chapter leadership for being willing to have me out virtually and talking about this. And there it is. All right. I don't know if some of you may have seen this before. Zoom has this new thing where you can make a PowerPoint as your background and you can actually navigate through it. And I love that. So here's hoping it works. All right. Again, thank you for having me. This is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I think that we've done a good, if not great job as records managers talking about the need to manage information more effectively. And I think it's time to change that discussion for those of us who haven't already, from a question of compliance and control and cost cutting to really focusing on business enablement. And so that's what I want to kind of talk about today with you today. Now, in terms of well, here's finding my little pointer thingy. All right. I wanted to tee this up by talking about too much information, and we know we have too much information. Everybody knows that. I'm not going to bore you to tears with that. This is one that I had to discuss with my daughter because apparently sometime about 10 years ago, the amount of hours of new cat videos that are uploaded every day has exceeded our collective amount of hours awake. My daughter loves these types of videos. Anything with an animal in it is just the thing for her. And now she can't watch them all. And she's a little frustrated about that. So this is, I think, the core challenge of our time. You know, everything else can be set aside. We need to find more time for cat videos, or at least for better cat videos. So I sent this out via Twitter last night and again this morning. I wanted to tee this up for you as we talk over the next few minutes. Again, the focus of this is on ensuring that we're positioning ourselves in our program as enabling better business outcomes. So my question and my challenge to you on this call today is this: how does your RIM program directly, tangibly, concretely, and probably most importantly, measurably support your organization's business outcomes? I want you to think about that if you haven't already, because at the end, we're going to have an audience participation segment wherein you're going to share these nuggets of wisdom. I'm going to capture them as your faithful scribe into the PowerPoint, and then that'll be available as a resource. Now, if you didn't see this before and you can't think of something in the next 30 minutes, that's certainly okay. I think that's going to be the key outcome of this is having that. In fact, I think it's going to replace your elevator speech. Now, to tee this up, here's the thing you need to keep in mind: actionable, relevant, measurable, preferably financially. Because if you just give us some pablum about, oh, we'll be better compliance, we'll keep the CEO out of jail, or even something like, well, by better information, we're going to decrease the amount of time our employees spend searching for information by 6%. My answer to you is going to be, so what? Who cares? Because it's not that I don't care, but your stakeholders don't care. They want to know, what have you done for me lately? What's in it for me? Actionable, measurable, concrete, realizable. So keep that in mind as we talk over the next 30 minutes or so, because there will be a pop quiz at the end. All right? All right. So I want to start by not talking about how most of these presentations start. Well, maybe just a little bit. And I put this in the description. I always thought this was funny. The amount of information is exploding. It's an explosion of information. There's way too much info. We know that. We live it, right? I don't know what this is actually a picture of, but it reminds me of an opportunity I got to see Yahoo. You guys know Yahoo. Some of you are old enough to remember Yahoo was still a thing. I got to visit Yahoo when it was still taking up only several dozen server racks at Stanford University. So this would have been 98, 99. They were a customer of the software company I worked for, and I was doing some work with Stanford, and they're like, hey, you want to see Yahoo? Sure, I'm geeky enough. Show me. And then it looked kind of like this. So there's lots of stats out there. The one that I liked was if you took all the information that we created last year and you burned it to DVD and you stacked those DVDs on top of each other, it would circle the earth 100 times. Yay, that and $8 will get you a beer tonight. Obviously, you don't have that much information. But just as obviously, we know we have a lot of information, right? Raise your hand or unmute yourself if you're creating less information this year than last year. Exactly. We know there's a problem. That's not the problem. The problem is what we do with it all. More on that in a sec. We also know that it lives everywhere, right? It lives in record keeping systems. It lives in other systems. We're not supposed to notice that it lives in Box and Dropbox and personal email and, these 14 flash drives that I have on my desktop right now, and probably a personal computer. And especially today, as we're hopefully, knock on wood, coming through COVID and thinking about going back to the office, it's even more everywhere because all of us had to do that pivot 2 years ago this month, right? 2 years ago, many of us were working in offices. I wasn't, but many of us had to work in offices, and then the pivot hit. And now it's literally everywhere, right? And so there's an issue there. I noted in the description that, yeah, it's in the cloud and in apps. To me, an app is the cloud, except it's got a better user interface, right? And it's on your phone. There's no material difference there. Where there is a material difference in perception, but not in reality, is this idea of the cloud. The cloud's just somebody else's computer. It doesn't matter. There's no difference. It's still your information. You still have to manage it. You still have to deal with it. There are nuances that are different, of course, but the issue is not whether something's in the cloud or not. The issue is it someplace that can be managed, that it can be handled appropriately, that you can
Is it me or did Jesse freeze?
There we go. The good news is your office probably doesn't look like this anymore in paper because you'd never be able to function like this. But that's exactly what your hard drive looks like. That's exactly what your file share looks like. And that's exactly probably what most of your information repositories look like. So we'll talk about how to clean up the mess here in just a bit. I mentioned COVID earlier. We've all had this shared experience, I think, of having to do that pivot. And if you can't read the cartoon, I love this cartoon. I actually licensed this. I purchased it because I like it so much. It says digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And the wrecking ball says COVID-19, right? 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago, most of us were still at our desks. We still had far too many paper-based processes. We still had far too many paper-based signature processes. And we were still moving in large part at the speed of paper for many organizations. And then COVID hit. And we all had to figure out, seemingly overnight, how do you get people VPN so they can work from home? How do you set up digital signatures? How do you get somebody to go into the office and scan all the incoming mail so that it can actually be used and dealt with? How do you do this stuff in the context of not being able to get office supplies, not having home offices for most of us, or at least not formal home offices. How do you cover the information governance stuff? How do you cover privacy and compliance and security stuff in this context? And nobody had a clue. Right now, 2 years later, I think most of us have some kind of a clue. And part of the thing that I find fascinating, and that we've got to really kind of hold the fort against, is now we're all going back to the office. It's RTO. RTO is the buzzword now, return to office. And I'm concerned that a lot of the gains that we've made in information management, both in terms of our discipline and our practice in records and information management, but also in how organizations handle their information writ large, is going to go back to the old ways of working. Yeah, we did digital signatures for 2 years, but you know, that was a unique time. Now we've got to go back to the old tried and true paper. Do we though? And I would argue we don't. And I would argue that we're the people who have to be on the wall there, you know, saying, hey, look, we made these changes. Let's keep them. The changes that we made that were good, let's keep. The changes that we made that were not so good, let's learn from them and figure out the way forward, so that we're not moving at the speed of paper. We're not doing the way we've always done it because the way we've always done it. And that means having some conversations and trying to leverage those changes in the discussions we have with our stakeholders that says, look, not only are we a business enabler, but because we're digital, we're even more efficient and more effective at being a business enabler. All right. So with all the stuff, all the information, all the gajillions and gazillions of zettabytes of stuff out there, let's talk about how to address the mess. This is something that I think has an element of the COVID discussion in it, because right now, the mess for many of us is at our house. It's in our laptops. It's in the cloud-based services that we've used to enable work over the last 2 years. And some of this is a good thing and some of this is a terrible thing. And I think that it's up to us to sort of guide and direct those conversations so that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Case in point, I believe, with apologies to every organization using file shares today should turn them off. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would turn them off today. I understand that's not feasible. I'm actually working with a company right now that has significant investment in their file shares as a key staging point for some of their business process. But file shares are terrible. You know, file shares are terrible. Again, I'll ask for the virtual show of hands. How many of you are happy that the information in your file shares is managed efficiently and effectively and supports business outcomes? I'll wait. PST files, email archive files, are evil. You can Google that very phrase and you'll find dozens of articles about how and why they're so evil. I'm willing to listen to your use case for them, but when I think about how corruptible they are, how fragile they are, how anathema they are to effective information management, you're not going to get me. So while we're turning stuff off, sometimes the conversation continues and says, well, you know, let's turn off all this other stuff. Let's turn off, we're not working from home anymore, so let's turn off Teams and Slack. And you know, then you'll get the guy who says, oh yeah, well, what we should do is turn off email. Keep Slack, turn off email. Again, baby with the bathwater, right? If you're going to turn everything off, you might as well turn off the internet, go home and huddle on the couch eating bonbons. I think the better bet is to look at what we've done for the last 2 years and be judicious about which things make sense to keep. Whether you're a Slack company or a Teams company or a Yammer company, I don't think really matters. But I think that's one of the tools in our toolkit now. I think having some sort of cloud-based, lightweight, collaborative repository, such as Box, such as Dropbox, such as SharePoint or Teams, is really effective. So I don't want to throw everything out, but I think it's important to actually think through, what did we do that we did in haste because it was good enough? And can we bring that back into the fold, while at the same time realizing that the underlying changes are the issue, not whatever the platform is. If people need to collaborate, it doesn't matter whether it's SharePoint, Box, or Dropbox in a very real sense. It matters that they have a place to go to get their work done. Step 2, make change. There's an old saying that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is today. What I mean by this is that I'm a big fan of day forward, and I'm not a huge fan of migration under most circumstances. And the reason for that is, by the time you get around to migrating most systems, whether we're talking about file shares or a content repository or something else, they're terrible. And if you lift and shift, you're just taking the mess and moving it from one side of the house to the other side of the house. I'm going to come back to this house analogy here in a bit. I think it's incumbent on us to think through whether we need to migrate stuff or not. The short-term pain of having to deal with 2 systems, as long as there's a clear delineation that effective January 1st, we're using this, effective April 1st, we're using this. I think that's workable in a lot of environments, not in every case or every environment, of course. But I bring this up because part of a discussion I had earlier this week was about file shares, and it was with a client. And the idea was, they have this process, it uses the file share as a staging point for their workflow, so they can't just turn this off overnight. Well, of course not. I get that. And change management and everything else, I get all that. The issue rather was, I said, what are we going to do with all the old stuff? Because we don't know what's in there. We don't trust what's in there. So why are you still using it? I digress. We don't know what's in there. We don't trust what's in there. And we're not sure how to move it across. Okay. Pick a date and start new on that new date. Gradually, stuff will age out. For the same reason, we don't have to necessarily scan every piece of paper in the organization. If it's coming up on its retention, why would you do that? Keep it until it rots away and then get rid of it accordingly. So I think this comes in a broader context of change management, the reluctance to change because of, you could call it opportunity cost, you could call it past history, you could call it whatever you want, but this idea that we can't change because we did stuff a certain way before and it'll be too disruptive. And I think that's something that we in particular, because I know many records managers kind of fall under this sometimes. We have to be very careful that on the one hand, we're not making change just to make a change, but on the other hand, we're not beholden to the way we used to do it because it's the way we used to do it. All right, step 3, tell your people where to put their stuff. If you get nothing out of today, you should get this. Your people need to know where to put their stuff. Now, many of you know that I worked at AIM for a number of years, and AIM's mantra for a good chunk of that time was, with apologies to Tolkien, one system to rule them all and in the darkness find them, right? You would take all these repositories and you'd consolidate them, and it didn't matter what it was, honestly. Pick your favorite Magic Quadrant company, you'd put everything in that. And what we got to realize over a while was that enterprise content management isn't really enterprise-wide content management. It is management of enterprise content. I like that. Make a stuff map. And the reason I'm using stuff, by the way, some of you may be curious as to that. I don't think users get records. I don't think there's enough training in the world for you to browbeat your employees into understanding the nuances between records and non-records. I think that's a very uphill fight. So if you don't get tied to terms like records, non-records, vital records, business records, I can get stuff. And I can get the distinction between important stuff and not important stuff, business stuff and not business stuff. That's 80% of the fight. The other 20% we can set up through automation, through guidance, through judicious use of tools and judicious use of processes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But I use stuff here very intentionally so as not to kind of get bogged down. What's a record sort of discussion? So the stuff map that Donda just mentioned, I like the idea of this because everybody has a different place for their stuff, right? If you're in HR, if you're in sales, if you're in engineering, if you're in marketing, whatever department you're in, content management is foundationally a departmental level thing. There are certain things that you can leverage in terms of economies of scale and economies of cost by having it deployed in multiple places, but the workflows are going to be fairly department centric. Your metadata, your taxonomies, your folder structures are going to be fairly departmental or work process centric. And so by encouraging people to either identify where they're currently putting their stuff and or making suggestions for better places to put their stuff, I think that's a big part of the battle. And anytime the answer to that question is shared drive, C drive, my laptop, flash drive, my email, that's an opportunity for discussion. And say that's not a really good place for your stuff because it's hard to manage, it's hard to use, it's hard to, do all those things with that we know needs to happen. So you should be able to ask any person in your entire organization, from the CEO down to the janitor, where do you put your stuff? And they should have an answer. And that's something that needs to be reminded and repeated and part of onboarding. And, that one thing is going to address so much of the problem of file shares, because most of file share usage in many organizations is because they don't know where to put their stuff. Give them a place to put their stuff, and that does so much for you. A lot of that stuff, on the other hand, is garbage. Depending on what stats you look at, anywhere from 60 to 80% of most organizations' stuff is garbage. It's redundant, outdated, trivial, that old saw about rot. It's personal files. I promise you, anybody who wants to see your pictures of your kids in quarantine or your vacation in the before times, they've seen it, right? So much of this stuff is garbage. It's different versions, it's different renditions. You've got a Word document and a PDF document and a scan document, and just it's got to get cleared out. Now, how do you go about doing this? I think for most organizations, the answer is not to expect the users to do it, which is a little bit of a paradox, because on the one hand, it's the user's stuff. They know what they have. They know what they need much better than I would as a consultant, or you would as a records manager 4 departments away from them. But on the other hand, they're not going to do it, because if they were doing it, they would already be doing it, right? So again, this is a place where I think judicious use of processes and tools can substantially support this, along with telling them where to put the stuff. So there are tools, is the good news. And this is not a tools discussion. There are, I said dozens on the slide. There are actually more than 100 of these out there. Anything from a fairly cheap tool like TreeSize Pro to some very complex, very expensive, but very flexible and robust tools that are either standalone tools or are available as part of more comprehensive suites, right? And these tools can do a lot of things in support of a file share cleanup. They can be used to identify sensitive information like PHI or PII. They can be used to identify, sensitive financial information. When they identify that sort of stuff, they can quarantine it and, put some kind of framework around it such that somebody is made aware that, hey, we've got what looks like credit card numbers out on our network someplace. We can use these tools to remediate and enrich from a metadata perspective. They can read an existing folder structure and turn that into metadata fields and metadata values in those fields, the actual metadata value for this document versus that one. They're incredibly powerful. they all work differently. And so, some are a better use case for one thing versus another, but they're out there and they're available. I think the problem with tools here specifically is that we often approach this from the idea that the tool is somehow going to do the work for us. And of course, that's not true. If you look at the kind of the iron triangle of process improvement, people, processes, and technologies, trained people who know where to put their stuff is going to cover the biggest part of this issue. Giving them processes and mechanisms to manage their stuff, including automation, is another big swath of it. And only at the end are we going to use these tools to really kind of help automate maybe some of the oldest and most obvious things. So for example, one of the things that many of these tools can do is give you a report that says the information in this folder on this file share, or in this SharePoint site, or in this location has not been accessed in 10 years. And from the retention schedule that stuff, or at least what you can discern about that stuff, has a retention period of 5 years or less. Okay. Prepare the report, send it to legal, get their buy-off on it. If you can identify the information owner, send it to them and say, hey, you're keeping this stuff just in case, but you haven't touched it for 10 years. And here's the report that shows that. Why are we still keeping this? And that's a pretty powerful thing. Even if you don't use anything in terms of actually enriching or migrating or anything like that, just being able to have that data at hand and say, look, why are we keeping this garbage just in case when it hasn't been touched in 10 years? So I kind of liken doing a file share cleanup to cleaning a house. Tools don't fix the underlying problems, right? If people are saving too much stuff, if they're saving stuff for too long, if they're downloading stuff from the repository and putting it in their personal file share so that they can find it later, that's the problem. It's not that it's Box or a file share, it's poor information management, information handling processes. And so we have to address those before we can throw tools at it. All right, so back to my analogy of cleaning a house. I have a teenage daughter. We just doubled her allowance. She's in the room now, so her ears are going to be burning. We just doubled her allowance by doubling her chores, right? She's a teenager, she needs money, etc. So one of the things that came about of this is that there were areas of the house that hadn't really been deep cleaned in a while. The bathroom hadn't really been de-soap scumified, if I can say that, if I can admit to that in public, for some time. And, baseboard scrubbing and, all those sorts of things that go with a deep spring cleaning. And I think the file share is kind of like that. Most people's file shares haven't been addressed in a long time. There's a lot of gunk out there. And, some of these tools, I think, might be a useful analogy in terms of some of the deep cleaning things that you would use to clean the soap scum off your shower after a long time. Once you've done that once, it becomes a whole lot easier as long as you keep up with it, right? So kind of the same thing here. How do we do the deep cleaning once and then make it so that it's something that's only a couple of hours a week moving forward, right? And so I think part of that is ongoing communications, reminding people, where do you put your stuff? You have to keep reminding them of that all the time, or they're not going to do it. We need to automate some of this stuff. And again, if they're putting stuff where they know it goes and we're automating putting stuff where it goes, that's 90% of the issue. Ultimately, I think organizations should legitimately consider removing file shares. I think they've outlived their usefulness in all but a very small handful of cases. And in those cases, I think you'd be better served by using something like a OneDrive or even a Box or a Dropbox type file sync and share system, where at least you have some modicum of metadata, some modicum of workflow, some modicum of security, better than simply Windows file system security. Obviously, I'd like it to be a real repository, but sometimes we don't get what we want. All right. So we started by talking about the gajillions of zettabytes and how most of these live in your file shares. And we've talked about cleaning up your file shares to be able to really focus on the stuff that is of business value. What I'd like to do now is kind of continue this discussion of business value and really focus on changing that conversation piece so that it's not just we're doing a file share cleanup to do a file share cleanup, we're doing it in support of business outcomes. The second thing you need to remember from this presentation is that whatever your organization does, the business is in the business of the business. Private sector, public sector, doesn't matter. Your organization exists for a purpose. You have a charter, a vision, a mission, and everything should be done in support of that. And so what that means is that as we think about things like information, we should be keeping and harnessing and leveraging information that supports those business outcomes, and conversely, not keeping stuff that doesn't. This is that just in case thing, right? And especially if you can generate those reports that says, look, just in case left on permanent leave 10 years ago, and he should have taken all these files with him because they haven't been touched since. So at the same time, that also means that we have to focus on that business value. We're a cost center. IT is a cost center. Unless you are a provider of goods and services to this industry, you're not in the business of records management. You're in the business of making or buying or selling or supporting or governing when it comes to your constituents if you're public sector. And that's where the focus needs to be. And then what we do, we need to figure out ways to point to how we support that directly, concretely, and specifically. That means treating information like an asset. Now, there's a great blog post that a law firm called Hush and Blackwell wrote about 6 years ago, way over the top. It's very much tongue-in-cheek. The link is there on the slide. I'll just give you a little tease. It says, I'm here at Rabbit Hole Inc. talking with the company's money manager in his office in the facilities department in the basement. Stop me if you've heard this one before or if you're living it. I'm interviewing him to get a better sense of how Rabbit Hole manages money as an asset. And he asked the manager, how much money does Rabbit Hole have? Well, frankly, nobody knows because we don't really track that. We have boxes of paper money stored offsite, but as for active, digital money, our employees keep that wherever it makes sense from them to work with it, in the network money systems, in their individual offices, in mobile wallets, and some of them probably have some stashed at home. We just don't really track that. That's absolutely nuts from a financial perspective. Yet some of you have had that same conversation about your information. And that's part of the dynamic I think we need to change. At the same time, we have to recognize that companies don't care about compliance. As a rule, individuals within the company might, but again, unless you're a service provider or solution provider to our space, agencies don't care about their own internal compliance. Companies don't care about their compliance until something bad happens. And some of you have felt that hot, bright spotlight. And they care about it for the breadth and length of the visibility on the news. And then once it passes over, they don't care about compliance again, right? And I think many of us have struggled with that fight of you're up and then things go away and then they don't care until the next bad thing happens, which was entirely predictable because they stopped doing the things that would prevent the bad things from happening. So what's that mean to us? We've got to stop talking about compliance because senior management doesn't care and doesn't want to know about it. They just don't. What they care about is business outcomes, finance, the bottom line, profitability. Even if you're a nonprofit or in public sector, resources are never unlimited. And so how to do more with less with scarce resources is always an issue. And that's the conversation we have to get into, I think. And that's what I'm challenging you to do here momentarily. We need to make the business case, and this needs to be our elevator pitch. Good information management directly leads to better business outcomes. Now, we need to internalize that the reverse is also true, but that's for us to think about, because again, your CEO doesn't care. They're not going to get the connection between poor information management and costs associated with discovery and bad fallout from privacy or a breach. They're just not going to make that connection, and they're not going to listen to us try and make it. So I think we have to focus on how we can support the mission of the business concretely, tangibly, and measurably. By the same token, we have to internalize and understand the compliance issues. But again, that's for us to know. If we're managing information as an asset effectively, the stuff largely takes care of itself. There's some tweaking and some stuff we have to do around the edges, of course. But if you're managing your information appropriately in support of business outcomes, that's the lion's share of what we'd have to do for compliance as well. And I think part of the key here is there are ways to do this in a way that support customer outcomes. I had a conversation about privacy the other day with a couple of people, and one of them said, well, you know, Utah just signed their privacy law. Colorado, Virginia, and California are already there. California's already tweaking theirs. There's Florida's doing it. Georgia's doing it. Everybody's doing privacy. There's going to be federal privacy law at some point. Fantastic. Let's hitch our wagons to privacy. Well, CEO doesn't care about privacy either, except to the extent that there's not a breach and they're not on the front page of the New York Times, right? But CEOs care about customers. And the other person in our conversation said, it's not a compliance thing, it's a customer trust thing. Customers want to believe that we're going to gather their information effectively, we're going to manage it appropriately, we're going to use it for what we said we're going to use it for and not for what we didn't say we were going to use it for, and that we're going to keep it safe. They can feel confident giving us their information because we're going to do good with it for certain values of good. And I think that was a pretty powerful statement because it really underscored this idea that it's not about compliance. Compliance with CPRA comes by doing all those things. But it's looking at it through the prism of the customer's eyes and the customer's perception and the better business outcome that you get from engendering and continuing that customer trust, rather than, well, we're not going to get fined for not processing DSAR requests fast enough. The last thing before we turn to on the audience participation portion here is we've got to digitize everything that moves as soon as you can. Yeah, absolutely, John. Customers could be auditors. If a piece of paper comes into your organization, and you may not have a choice, especially if you're public sector, but even if you're private sector, not everybody has an iPhone 13 and, you know, absolutely rock solid Wi-Fi. You have to deal with paper. I get that. But you don't have to manage it as paper. You don't have to process it as paper. And so if you have a channel coming into your organization that accepts paper, there should be a scanner at the first desk it hits. Move bits around rather than moving paper. Sign things with bits rather than signing it with ink. Okay. Now, let's talk turkey. This is an actual turkey, by the way. I cooked this a couple of years ago. There's no better way, in my estimation, to cook a turkey than upside down, and then you spin it halfway through, and I'll leave you as a thought exercise for how to do that with a hot turkey. Cover it in a bacon weave and let it cook the rest of the way. And I'm using this because I'm hungry, but also because I want to transition and talk about what you guys are doing, have done, and will do to enable business outcomes of your organization. So unmute yourself, type it into the chat. I'm going to try and capture anything that's said directly into this slide, which means I have to stop sharing this way and share a different way so that you can see what I'm writing. Of course, bacon, you know that. So I'm going to take notes. You guys unmute and talk or post them in the chat. Be specific, because the question behind the question is, so what? Why should anybody in your organization care about what you're about to tell us? So who wants to be the first victim? Don't everybody talk at once. I'll start picking on people. I just gave you an example from the client that I'm using. Their better information management enables customers to trust them. And that's a key part of their positioning with their customers, is that it is safe to do business with them and safe to share information with them because they take it very seriously. Can they quantify that? I don't think they've been able to put an actual dollar amount on it, but certainly one of their competitors who recently had a data breach that made the news, their sales, because they're a public company, their sales were reported, and that is quantifiable. How can your RIM program enable successful business outcomes? What have you done? Those of you who are consultants who have been doing this a minute, what have you done with your organizations? What have you done with your clients?
So Jesse, there are a few folks responding in the chat.
Okay.
Fines for the organization if we can't find it or lose it.
Okay.
We have
that one.
Yeah.
So what? How does your records program support that fiduciary responsibility? See what I mean? That's the specificity that we want to get. Is this sounds nice? Your CEO is going to fall asleep before you finish saying that. And I'm not picking on whoever typed this. My point more broadly is, think of it in the context of an elevator speech. You got 15 seconds. How are you going to get somebody's attention? I help us bring a product to market 10% faster. And that results in millions of dollars of sales this year versus next. Wow. Okay. Come to lunch with me, young Padawan. Let's talk about this records thingy that makes us millions of dollars. Again, reduce discovery costs. So what? What does that do for you? What does that do for the mission of the organization? And again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but I want us to think about this, not from the perspective of avoiding bad outcomes, but of materially contributing to the organization's success. I think that's the.
I'm going to
Go ahead.
unmute for half a second.
Uh-huh.
We can say all the lovely words we want to them, but what I'm discovering that if you put it in a relatable context, even in the elevator speech, if you use language that they can relate to, sometimes
Yes.
I'm having to relate back to other fields like library science or other things that they can have virtually visited or actually visited physically. Like a library has stuff and they organize this stuff in a fashion on shelves. Or if you use some type of example from that field, they're able to understand why that needs to be done, what effect it will actually have if you do the necessary organization. Is that so then they're actually able to visualize with something that they know. So it's terms and visualizing with prior knowledge.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And that's really the foundational thing that I'm trying to get across here is the context matters, words matter, and the words that we've been using around compliance and reduction in risk and those sorts of things, it's like the old saying, if you're selling drill bits, people don't want drill bits. They want a hole. So how can you position your drill bits as something that will make a hole of the right size? It's easy, it's environmentally sound, it's, you know, whatever it is, but the point is their need is a hole. On the flip side, there's the apocryphal quote from Henry Ford that said, you know, if I'd ask people what they want, they'd want a faster horse. Well, what they needed was more efficient transportation, right? And so I think you're right. I think the words matter. And I think that if we can change our conversation to here's what we do as a business, as an agency, as a department, and here's how what we do in records and information management makes that better, faster, maybe cheaper, but more successful to our business outcomes, that's something powerful. That's something transformative that does get CEOs and CFOs and CXOs attention, as opposed to, you know, we'll be better compliant. Because nobody believes they're not compliant until they're not, and then nobody believes it'll happen again. That's my point. But get a loan at any branch in the province. Yeah, I like that. I don't have to go to my specific bank. I can go anywhere. That's a direct customer outcome. Destroyed enough boxes to save 10,000 a year on storage. It may or may not be a huge sum, but save. Better tracking of letters of credit, which could result in millions of dollars in better outcomes. Yeah. Speeding up the approval process for contracts and financial transactions. Yes. The example I like to use is from accounts payable and accounts receivable. And some of you may know this. There's often a prepayment reduction of a couple of percent. It's not a huge amount if you pay before the due date. And certainly there's a late fee tacked on if you pay after the due date. Better information management and a squidge of automation would probably let you hit many of those prepayment discounts and miss all of the late payment penalties. And for an organization of any size, that could be millions of dollars. Something as simple and non-sexy as that could be millions of dollars. That'll get your CFO's attention. Saving an average of X hours, billable hours per attorney per client. Yeah, of course they may not want that. The attorneys may not want that, right? Yeah, you know, you have to do the legal stuff. I get that. But what I'm trying to argue here is that if we do the right things for the right reason and support of business outcomes, the regulatory stuff kind of comes along with it. And by the way, in that context of the FDA, if you have your documentation in a row, doesn't that make research go faster? Doesn't that make trials go faster? Doesn't that make audits go faster? And ultimately, doesn't that bring a product to market faster? That's that benevolent chain that I'm talking about. Now you can say, our records management program helps us bring products to market faster. And that's powerful, right? Saved 100K in storage costs. Got a wow from senior management. I like that. Yeah, so this is the thing that I think we need to do. And so this is my, I guess, third and final takeaway is work on this pitch. If you can change your elevator speech into this is the business of the organization and this is how records management directly, tangibly, concretely supports this, you're gold. Because everybody wants to know that. Most of the people in your organization don't care about compliance. Some will care about cost cutting. Nobody cares about risk until it happens. I'm not going to touch that one, Meg. I don't disagree with it, but I'm not going to touch it. Okay. So if anybody has further thoughts, throwing them in the chat. If the team at the leadership can send me that chat after the session, I'll make sure to get those into this before I send the presentation back to you. I did want to take just one real quick note and suggest some resources to you, and one in particular. I'm a huge fan, where is it, of Infonomics. I don't have any relationship to the author. I don't get anything for this. With apologies to my book loving friends, I have dog-eared the holy shnikes out of it. You can see that. I've purchased this book and given it to people. It's a fantastic book for thinking through how to talk about information and information management in a more financial and fiduciary context. The other two books listed there are okay. They're a little bit more academic, I guess. The Sunil Soers one in particular is great because it talks about from the different sectors, industry sectors, and also, you know, how do you talk about selling information governance to your marketing team? How do you talk about it to your IT team? And so I think there's some good stuff there. And then that last link is just the link to the hundreds of Zeta, Peta, Yeta, Zata bytes that are out there, and what it all means and how many times it would circle the sun and whatnot. So, all right, I think that's my time. As I said, I'm happy to have the chapter post. Certainly, I'm sure they'll post a recording. I'll have them post the PowerPoint too if they would like. It'll be up on SlideShare. If you have any questions for me, feel free to send them to me or to the chapter leaders, and they'll get them to me, and we'll talk about them. Thanks everybody for coming and for playing along, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
So guys, we do have a little bit of the end here for Stephanie to tell you all what's going on with our community outreach program.
Thank you, Donda. And thank you,
Welcome.
Jesse. That was a great presentation. I'll just reintroduce myself to people that don't know me. My name is Stephanie McKinney, and I'm VP of Community Outreach for AMA New England. On behalf of our Community Outreach Committee, I'd like to give you a few updates of what's been going on. One of the first is our AMA New England chapter charity fundraising campaign has chosen a new company and organization to get behind, and it was brought to us by our board member, John Curran. And this season, we're going to be supporting Shriners Children's Boston Hospital, and we want to support their exceptional work that they do in children, pediatric, and specialties researching and teaching. So please check that out under our community organizations section on our webpage, and there's a nice write-up of what the hospital does, and there's a link to donate. And we thank you, John.
You're welcome.
I also have posted a list of charities for Ukraine. I'm sure everybody's being inundated at their other offices and things like that, but I thought it was good that AMA New England does have a face for this also. And so there is some links provided again under our community organization section, and different charities with a write-up of what they're doing. And please check that out also. And I wanted to thank Meg for all the help that you've been doing, helping me with community organization and getting these things up on the webpage. Another thing that I just updated was Inspirational Corner. And that's just a little place where we make nice quotes and, you know, just let people say what they like and do some quotes. So I did in honor of Women's History Month, we did have a quote from Audrey Hepburn, which leads me right into April, which April is our National Volunteer Month. So with that, it's a month that's dedicated to recognizing and the importance of volunteers and honoring significant contributions that volunteers make with their generosity of donating their time and talent. And with that being said, I'm working on a list for our 6 New England states to see. I will be putting up something that each state could look at, and there will be some volunteer opportunities. So hopefully that'll be up and running by next week. And I just wanted to let people know about that too. And I was making a phone call for Boston to maybe see about getting together and doing some volunteer work for the food bank, the local food bank. hopefully we can do something in person. I think it'd be nice if we could all see each other and get together. That's starting to happen slowly, but we'll see if that can come to, fruition. So hopefully that will. Also, our community organization committee has been working on our spring meetup. And you might say, what's your spring? What's a meetup? So it's we're trying to do it maybe twice a season, just trying to come together. We're trying to pick different towns to investigate and maybe secure some spots, maybe do a tour. So the town that we're looking at right now is Hingham. And we thought that would be really nice in the spring. And if we can all get together in person, that'd be great. And it's just a place where we can come together, meet each other and different members, maybe some of our new members that are coming on board, have a chat, pick a topic, or we could just, learn about each other, maybe get a quick bite to eat or adult beverage or something like that. So we're looking at time and dates, and hopefully we'll be able to send that information out and get a feel for what people would like for a time or day for that. So stay tuned for that. Then hopefully that'll be up very shortly also. I wanted to say I had the opportunity of attending ALA last week. On March 17th, which is the Association of Legal Administrators, the Boston chapter. And it was a one-day leadership conference. So I was able to attend that. And they had just recently had their new board elections. So I met the new president, Beverly O'Reilly, and I met VP of Member Relations, which is Jan Adai, and VP of Community Engagement, which is kind of like our VP of Community Outreach, Mrs. Corson. So hopefully I'm looking forward to getting together with these ladies. They were all wonderful and very smart and intelligent, and I'm hoping to secure a process where I'm in New England and ALA could do some type of collaboration. So I'm really looking forward to that, trying to pull that together, and hopefully we'll have some information about that and pick a nice topic that we can all work together with. And then I just wanted to mention a little bit, Mark had said about our first annual golf event. We have formed a committee and our chapter is very excited about that. It's slated to happen on Monday, September 19th, 2022. And we'll be raising money for our chapter and various charities or organizations. And I think it's going to be a fun-filled event. And we're hoping that we can get other people to join us and help us with some of things that we need. We're looking for sponsorships, and maybe that would be sponsoring a golf cart, or I'm not a real golf person, so I'm learning a little bit, but I heard there's like a hole-in-one contest. So things like this we could talk about. We definitely need marketing ideas and some promotional ideas. So if anybody has expertise in this or would just like to join our chapter and help us out along, this is something that we as a chapter really would like to have done annually. And so since this is our first one, we're looking for help and we can't wait to get this off on the ground. John and Colin and Mark have been doing a lot of work in this, so let's support them. And that's about it right now from our community organization.
Thanks, Steph. Great job. I love all the stuff that you're doing. So thank you for keeping us all informed and trying to get us all together. It's great. We would love to be able to have Jesse here at some point.
Yeah, maybe
all this in-person stuff is starting to come back. So we're super excited about that opportunity. Just to reiterate what Mark and Stephanie and others have said on the leadership team is this is a small team of leaders that are running through and making this programming something that's great for you. So please donate small portions of time so that we can make the programming even better. Small portions of time versus large portions of time for the smaller group. So we really would like to build our committees. If you're curious about that, message me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have a conversation with you about the small commitments of time on smaller committees if you don't want to lead something. But if you do want to lead something, we absolutely would love for you to build and develop your leadership skills, and we can certainly help you with that. So with that, thank you, Jesse, very much. Once again, you're always an awesome guest to have for us. And thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to the board and the rest of you all that have joined us today. So have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donda.
Bye, guys.
Thank you,
Hey, guys.
Don.
Thank you.